This recording is from the Developing My Loving Self group and is part of an Education in Love series.
So we're looking at our primary sources of pain here. So this is our main thing, primary sources of pain. Now, if pain has all been created from sin, so we could say sin creates our pain, the question then becomes whose sin, doesn't it? Whose sin creates pain? Well, the primary cause of your pain is actually your own sin. So personal sin. Interesting, huh? That's the primary cause of your pain, your own sin. There's a lot of reasons why this is true. The primary one being that the God can assist you to release any pain that's inside of you associated with the sins of others much more easily than God can assist you to release the pain caused by your own choices. You see, you can choose to feel about the pain caused by others much easier than you can choose to feel about the pain you cause others. Isn't that true? And so it's actually much easier for God to help you release the pain that others have caused through their sin than it is for God to help you release your pain based on your sin. Because releasing your pain based on your sin requires a whole heap of personal awarenesses about oneself, which often we are and when I say often, usually in complete denial of. We're usually in complete denial of all of the choices we've made that cause sin. All right. Rick, you want to ask? Just straight behind.
Would that be because of denied fears?
Yes, many of our fears are actually associated with how we perceive ourselves. And because of this particular problem, we are very resistive to seeing ourselves as God sees us. And because we are resistive to seeing ourselves as God sees us, we are therefore very resistive. We use our will to resist that awareness of self, and we use our will to resist God healing us through that process of becoming aware of ourselves. So it's much harder for you to become aware of yourself than it is for you to become aware of another person, actually. You are much more open emotionally to seeing what's going on with another person than you are open emotionally to seeing what's going on with yourself. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And there's some primary reasons why that is the case, which we can examine. All right, let's look at our personal sin. There's three primary categories, you could say, of our personal sin. The first category is the category of our relationship with God. Most do not realise that refusing a relationship with God is the largest sin you can ever commit. The reason why is because the relationship with God offers the most benefits to your life. So therefore, by refusing to develop a relationship with God, we are refusing the majority of the benefits that God could give. So therefore, we are causing the most amount of pain and suffering to ourselves and others by refusing our relationship with God. So the very first choice that humanity made, the so-called story of the garden, in the Garden of Eden, of Adam and Eve, that choice to reject God's gifts and reject really the relationship with God has had the largest detrimental effect on humankind. That's bigger than any other sin we could have committed. And each of us commit this sin. Each of us choose to, actually. It's a personal choice we make. Interesting, huh? Yeah, big issue we have. So this is one of our personal sin. Now, the another one is to do with our relationship. Let's spell it right, instead of trying to shorthand everything. On ship with others. This is where we have a tendency to commit more sins. We treat other people badly from God's perspective. We treat other people without love from God's perspective, and this causes a large majority of our sin too. It has a large detrimental effect on our soul. So therefore it's another cause or another source of our personal sin. Now, can you see what the next one would probably be? Our relationship, with self, We have huge problems in this regard, where we treat ourselves unlovingly, or we treat ourselves as superior to others, which is also treating ourselves and others unlovingly. Right? And this has a huge detrimental effect as well, and creates the majority of our sin, and therefore the majority of our pain. So even our physical pain is created by these things, and we need to understand that. So most of us, when we have physical pain, we're looking for some kind of relief to our suffering, aren't we? Not understanding that actually the unloving choices we have personally made have led to this situation of having personal physical pain. That applies to all diseases and all illnesses and all types of physical pain we experience. We need to understand the relationship. Alan, you want to ask?
Is our pain in regards to the grief from the lack of relationship with God larger than the grief and the pain in the relationship we had with our parents?
Well, for the majority of us, it's not just... most of us don't have grief associated with our lack of relationship with God because we've chosen to have no relationship with God, actually. But one reason why we've chosen to have no relationship with God is because of how our parents have treated us, and we have certain emotions associated with how our parents have treated us, which certainly are a factor in causing us to no longer desire a relationship with God.
Hence the blocks and things like that we've created.
Correct. But if you think about it, as we discussed in the will discussion, those with the week that we did on will, we could choose to have faith in God even though we don't have faith in our parents. That is a choice. So in the end, it's still a choice that we're making. We're making a choice to deny a relationship with God, even though we could choose to have a relationship with God. And that is almost independent of whether we have a relationship with our parents or not. Right? So we've got to see how we're making choices, how we're using our will in this regard. So while there are mitigating circumstances, shall we call them, associated with why we don't have a relationship with God, in the end, we are still making a choice to not have one. Right? And although there are mitigating circumstances that cause us to treat other people unlovingly, we also have the ability to analyse things from a morality and ethical point of view, an ethical or moral perspective. We can still gather one, and we're choosing to not do it. So how much of it is, what we've been predisposed to do through our training and upbringing, and how much of it is our justification of our choice? And this is what we need to start to examine, isn't it? How we're using these old events of our pain to justify creating even more pain in most regards. That's what we're doing, instead of making a different choice. Yeah. So these particular aspects are very important parts of our pain, aren't they? They are the creators of our pain, our relationship with ourselves, a relationship with others, a relationship with God. And when you think about the most important things that you treasure in your heart, can you see that relationships are some of the most important things you treasure, aren't they? You get rid of your trappings of the world, as we call them, and material things in life. At the end of the day, they don't bring you that much happiness, do they? But what brings you the most unhappiness, generally, is your relationships, isn't it? Or the lack of such relationships with others. And you can see this is where our primary unhappiness is also coming from. This is where our pain comes from. Our personal sin, our personal choice to be unloving in these three aspects of our life. Now, that being the case, there's two other sources of pain, because there's our personal sin, but then there's also our parents' sin, isn't there? And maybe I should write that a bit differently. Instead of a singular, our parents' sin. All right, so both mum and dad had certain sins that they've committed, and as a result of their sins, in other words, things out of harmony with love that they've done, those sins have been imposed upon us in our childhood, and that certainly does contribute to our pain. But as I've said, those sins can be more easily removed because we are often far more open to seeing them than we are to seeing these. Yeah. In addition, there's processes that God has in place, which we'll learn about in God's laws and so forth, that mean that this process is a process of forgiveness, actually, whereas this process is a process of repentance. And repentance is always harder than forgiveness. Okay, so later when we talk about laws, you will see that repentance is much more difficult than forgiveness. You could say repentance partially involves forgiveness of oneself, but more often than not involves repenting for one's own actions, feeling sorry about and doing something about one's own actions. Now, of course, the parents, before you were born, lived in a society. And society's sin certainly had a bearing on the parents' actions. Right? So that's another source. These are the sources of pain that we have. So three primary sources: our own personal sin, our parents' sin, and society's sin.